earlier. Brett McMurphy put this out there earlier. One reason the ACC is considering those schools, ESPN's media rights deal with the ACC allows them to renegotiate, i.e. reduce revenue. If league drops below 15 members, with potential future departures of Florida State, Clemson, and possibly others, the ACC considering Power 5 schools now as opposed to G5s later to maintain required membership. On top of that, then Bob Thompson responded with this one. Well, I thought TV drove all the expansion decisions. If Brett's story is true, ESPN will be paying $72 million life insurance premium for the benefit of the ACC, clearly not in ESPN's interest. A sweet deal for the ACC.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, it's not great that the conferences can just go, we'll add these schools and now you have to pay because you put it in the contract. But ESPN also, they're not immune to making bad decisions. All of this is about, some bad decisions that the TV networks have made over the years. But yeah, that would seem to me a good plan to make sure that you are staying at 15 before some schools could potentially leave you, and doing it with Power 5 editions as opposed to G5 editions. So we'll see where that goes into the future, which also would make sense for what's going to be the 17-team league football season. That's going to look all wonky as well for a little while when they do that.
I mean, that's what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do it now so you don't have to do it later. That's that's the part that makes sense, makes the whole thing make sense, because not a lot of the rest of it does. Outside of just basically, cutting off the inevitable departures at the pass and going ahead and filling up so that when these schools that you basically now are just openly saying like you think that they're going to leave or anticipate that they will, okay, yeah, like I said earlier, there's a pretty good chance that Cal and Stanford aren't available the way they are now 5 years from now, if that's when Florida State finally does what they plan on doing. Mm-hmm. So you went ahead and you grabbed them, and that way, if Florida State does in fact do what they have, talked about doing, and others do as well, then you've already got the best teams that are available. So this is basically like if the Big 12 had added BYU and Cincinnati and Houston and UCF before Oklahoma and Texas left, knowing that Oklahoma and Texas were probably going to leave at some point. That's all this is, and that's why it makes some semblance of sense. And it appears to really have a lot of momentum behind it, although this has kind of been, going on for a few days. It appears that there's probably, a little bit more of a ways to go, although with that situation tonight, the meeting tonight that's been reported, I mean, maybe we do have some clarity, but yeah, I mean, that's their tactic, and that makes sense from their end, from their standpoint. Go ahead and grab teams that, will fill up those spots that might be, open here in any time in the next few years. But as far as the lifeline goes, I know Bob's way more plugged in than I am, but I mean, ESPN does have them under contract for a long time, so I know they're throwing them a lifeline, but they also, I think, have a vested interest in the ACC functioning. So, what would the alternative be? Kill the ACC to do what? Because, I hear all this stuff about the super conferences and, the money and all that, but, you still have to fill TV windows. So are we eliminating teams to have less games when the whole idea is to have more games and better games? And so, yeah, the whole lifeline thing, I get where he's coming from, but at the same time, that would be like the Titanic shooting a missile at its, or intentionally running into the iceberg. Mm-hmm. So that wouldn't make any sense on ESPN's part. Let's see how it eventually shakes out, but there's certainly a lot of smoke around this right now.
I do think people would like to see, especially if you're ACC fans, ESPN put as much effort into that as they do the SEC. Now, granted, the SEC pays off a little bit more, obviously, because of, every year there's an SEC team, at least in the national championship game, if not winning it. And the ACC's been a little bit more scattershot when it comes to that, because there's only two of those teams that have done that.
But haven't they won the second most national titles, well below the SEC, with Florida State and Clemson?
Yeah, they have. But even so, I get why they do more than they.
I'm talking about in the last few years.
Absolutely. But I think that you look at it though, like Florida State and Clemson leave, then that means that they can renegotiate, and not in the good way for the ACC. They come and say, okay, well, those 2 schools are gone. You're below 15 teams now. Guess what? Now we can drop you down to $14 million a year because that clause is in the contract. So I'm sure the door swings both ways, and we'll see if it works out for the ACC in the long term. And they may look, if they lose more than 4 of the schools that they have in the thing, they're going to have to add some G5s anyway. So maybe that's where Oregon State and Washington State come in down the line if Florida State and Clemson leave, so they can always kind of stay buoyed closer to 20 than they would be to 15
in the
so
end,
they don't lose that.
In the end, Oregon, Washington, the 4 schools entering the Big 12, what happens with Cal and Stanford, all of these teams, remember, had an opportunity, the conference did, back when ESPN offered whatever it was, $30 million or so, and they said no. And in the end, are they all going to end up with more money? And are the networks going to end up spending less money? Is that a possibility that Fox and ESPN will spend less money because they don't have to pay the Pac-12, and yet in the end, Oregon, Washington, with some of these being partial or a little bit less than 100%, all of them ended up making more money?
I don't know that they're all making more money. I don't think that's necessarily.
Stanford and Cal are going to get less.
Yeah, I mean,
they're taking a 30% share.
Partial shares, so that wouldn't be that.
And Oregon, Washington aren't getting a full share right off the top either.
Right. I think the appeal, though, for the Big Ten is that it's not what you get right away. If you're Oregon and Washington, it's what you get for years to come. You're eventually going to get a lot of money. You're eventually going to make a lot of appearances in big games on big networks and have exposure that you otherwise weren't ever guaranteed in this new Pac-12 arrangement that never came to fruition. So, it's not just about simply making more money, but, I think Oregon and Washington are certainly better off in this arrangement than they were in the Pac. Now, are they likely to win more titles this way? No, I think that the odds are a lot longer now, but certainly they're set up to be more stable than a lot of other teams that they were previously arranged with or competing with. And now they've separated themselves in some ways from like the Big 12, because they're now in the Big 10 and going to be making that Big 10 money. So they're in the top 2. They're in a top 2 conference. Remains to be seen on Oregon State and Washington State. I don't know how this is working out in a more positive note for them. It's certainly not, unless there's a Big 12 lifeline coming, which there's not really an indication that that's going to be the case necessarily, especially when everybody's saying, involved, that's saying the opposite from the Big 12 perspective. But, yeah, for Cal, adding in the travel costs and all that, I don't know that this is anything other than this is just what you have to do to maintain a certain status quo.
Be at the table.
Yeah, that's really it. SMU's not taking money simply to have a chair at the table. They might get like the leftover scraps thrown on their plate as we're watching everybody else, eat, chicken fingers or something, and they're sitting there getting like just nothing but skin, but they're fine with that because it's going to be worth it in the end just because they have a seat at the table. So yeah, there might be a couple situations where, a school that's moving is better off, but I think for the most part, it's a lot of collateral damage, and in some cases, unfortunately for perhaps Oregon State and Washington State taking a bit of a demotion here.
So Washington State, Oregon State, looking around for what happens with them, probably have to wait. Will they? I don't know. Gloria Nevarez, maybe she's having discussions with one of those or both those schools, Oregon State, Washington State, to try to get that thing locked in for them. And they have to take what is best right now because it's not going to be the ACC. It's not going to be the Big 12. So if Gloria Nevarez at the in Mountain West or if Mike Oresco in the American call one of them or both of them or want to sit down with them, they need to listen. They need to listen now. I know that. I'm saying that. They have to listen because there really is no other alternative for them.
Well, look, if there's nothing as permanent as we've seen. Look, to give the TCU example, they've been in a bunch of conferences, so nothing's permanent. We know that. So 5 years from now, if the ACC needs some more teams, I'm sure Oregon and Washington State, Oregon State and Washington State will be 2 of the first that they call because they would have been, Power 5 teams pretty recently and just because of their circumstances got left out in the cold.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sucks, and we'll see. I mean, we need finalization before saying that, reading them their last rites or, trying to put too much of a concrete summary on things because it's a fluid situation at the moment. And for all we know, we might be pointing and laughing at SMU again here in the next 24 hours. There's a vote tonight, apparently, reportedly, but that doesn't guarantee anything. And or not, we could wake up tomorrow or later on tonight, and the ponies are back in the dance. And obviously, there's a lot of other teams involved as well. But yeah, I mean, I think Oregon State and Washington State have pretty clearly been trying to look out and do whatever they can, and exploring every option that they can with a little help from, advisors and at Oliver Luck, and just trying to figure out the best situation. Ideally for them, it would be the Big 12 or something along those lines, but that doesn't appear to be in the cards. And yeah, I think that they would both like to have some final, some finality to those decisions as well. So hopefully a lot of that's coming for everybody that's out there kind of dangling right now here in the next couple of days or the next week, and we can kind of put that part to bed and see what's next.
Michigan offensive coordinator Sharon